on to block number 3, but this will not be a stranger to you. Block number 3 is exactly like the Beth block, except it's smaller, and we're going to call this Bethette. In block 2, we learned how to make the Beth block, which ended up a 7-inch finished square. The Bethette block in block 3 will end up a 4-inch finished square, so it's the same thing, but smaller and a little more challenging. Because of the size difference, we have to print these foundation pieces out a little different than we did with the Beth block. So let's select the Beth block once again, and you'll see how it automatically defaults to 6 inches. We're trying to come up with a 2-inch block, so we're just going to put the 2 in there, and by keeping everything proportional, it'll automatically change the height and the width at the same time. Now, we need a total of 26 of these star blocks, or these Bethettes. Each one of them takes 4 segments. So that gives you a total needed of 104. So we'll enter that. Now I want you to also notice something else. If you're printing on 8.5 by 11 paper, we are now able to get 9 pattern pieces on each foundation sheet. So we only need 12 sheets to print all 104 foundation pieces. Now if you have several different places for your paper to be inserted for your printer, in my case I have 2, I keep my foundation papers in the rear tray, so I would go in and just simply tell it to take my paper from the rear tray versus the cassette, and then I would go ahead, I'm going to cancel this now, but I would go ahead and print this, and I would be ready to get started on my Bethette blocks. Now, as far as cutting your fabric, we're going to follow the same techniques that we used for block 1 and 2. We're going to use the paper templates, we're going to add a 1/2 inch all the way around, and then we'll proceed to cut our pieces out. Because there are so many of them, needless to say, they won't all fit under a clothespin. So I've elected to use plastic sandwich bags and put the clothespin to close the bag. Yikes! 104 segments? That's going to take forever. So how about if we learn a new way to assemble our blocks? We're going to start doing some speed stitching. Because we've done these Beth blocks before, what we're doing now is a Beth block but on a smaller scale. So we know how to construct the block. In this lesson, I'm going to show you how to do it in a chain method, so you're doing a lot less stopping and starting and getting a lot more accomplished. The reason I'm showing you this is because we have to make 26 of these blocks. I know, I'm sorry, but we have between now and the time that we're ready to do the borders to get them finished. So this is just a jump start for you. So the way we're going to start this is we got a stack of number 1s, we've got a stack of number 2s, and we have a stack of our foundation pieces. So what we're going to do is we're going to start out by doing the same type of technique we did before. We have our number 1, wrong sides together to our foundation piece. If I turn it over, you can see this is right side because you can read Beth's block. So we know we have it right. If we also flip it over, you can see that I have these pieces placed so they're approximately 1/4 inch into section number 2. So now we're ready to stitch. again, as before, I'm using a short stitch length of 2.0, and we'll just go ahead and stitch this. Now normally at this time we stop, we trim, we press, and add the third piece. But instead of doing that, we're just going to continue on doing the same thing over and over. I'm going to flip it over so the wrong side is showing. I'm going to put piece 1 and 2 with piece 1 face down, or wrong sides together, to the foundation. Piece 2, right sides together against piece 1. Let's flip it over. Make sure that we're aligned approximately of 1/4 inch into section 2. And we're going to not stitch it that way. We're going to turn it over on the stitching line and stitch that just like we did before between line 1 and 2. And we're going to continue on in this manner until we get several of these blocks done, and then we'll proceed from there. So let's recap this. We're going to take one Beth block. We're going to place all the foundation pieces upside down so they're just easy to grab, and you'll know you're grabbing and sewing and placing your fabric on the right side. So we're going to start out placing them all upside down. We're going to grab one of those. We're going to grab a number 1 piece, and we're going to grab a number 2 piece. Now, we know the orientation, we know they have to go right sides together. So if we weren't doing paper piecing, we would basically line them up like this and we would stitch right sides together. But we are doing paper piecing and everybody's liking it. So instead of just stitching, we're going to lay it on our foundation piece. And let me try to angle the camera a little bit better for you. We're going to lay that on our foundation piece so it looks like it might be approximately 1/4 inch into section 2. To double check, we'll flip it over and we'll do any adjusting that we might need to. Place it down and stitch. So each one is going to be done exactly the same way. You'll be surprised how big of a stack you're going to end up with in a very short period of time. So now we have a stack of sections 1 and 2 stitched to the foundation piece. There's enough here, I believe, to make 6 full squares. So there's 24 blocks here, I think, if my math is correct. Brain is still fuzzy from all that stuff they were giving me in the hospital, so we will end up with 6 blocks. So what we're going to do now is, like we always have, we're going to press the seam flat. We're going to press the seam open, but we're pressing, not ironing. Again, I cannot strive enough or stress enough, particularly on these smaller blocks. If you want your points to match up exactly, make sure you are pressing them very well. And you're just going to go through the whole stack, pressing. And I'm sure this is like watching paint dry on the wall, and you don't need to see me pressing, but we'll be back after all the blocks are pressed, and we'll go to the next step. Now we have a pile of pieces 1 and 2 stitched together and pressed. Now we're ready to start trimming. Now when you're trimming pieces 1 and 2, there's a lot more trimming involved than any of the other pieces because you have to go completely around the whole thing. The other pieces you usually only have one or two sides to trim. So this part with sections 1 and 2 will take a little longer to trim, but because you're not starting and stopping, it's still going to go quicker. So just like we did before, we're going to start out using our cardstock, put it on the line between 1 and 3, fold back your template, put down your add a quarter, and trim. Now we're going to go between piece 1 and 5, do the same thing, fold it back, and trim. Now we're going to go between piece 1 and 8, fold back your foundation paper, add a quarter, trim. Now we're ready to come up the other side, and this is where we'll trim both piece 1 and 2 at the same time. Now remember, the original seam that we did here between 1 and 2, when we stitched it, we already allowed 1/4 inch, so there was no trimming there. So now we're going to put our cardstock down between pieces 1 and 2 and 4, right here. Fold back our temp foundation piece. Now I want you to notice something. Do you see how we have a lot more fabric here than we used to have? That's because we're working with a smaller block, and we're still using that 1/2 inch allowance all around the piece. Now you can cut this a little shorter, maybe make it 3/8. I've already done it at 1/4 inch, but it sure doesn't give you any oops room. So I definitely would go ahead and stay with a 1/2 inch. You're not wasting that much fabric, and it's just a whole lot easier. And you know you've got everything covered. So let's trim that away. We don't have to worry about this side because we'll get that when we trim the final block. And voila, we have the first block done. Now we'll continue on with all the rest of these, and when they're all trimmed, I'll get back to you with the next step. And thanks to the wonderful magic of video, here's all our pressed and trimmed pieces ready for a total of 6 Bethette blocks, 24 segments altogether. And it didn't take much time at all. We're now ready for our next step, and that's piece number 3. So I have all my pieces that I've stitched 1 and 2 together, I've pressed, and I've trimmed, and now we're ready to move on. So I have that stack here. I have my stack of number 2s, or I'm sorry, number 3s here, and we're ready to assembly line stitch these. So I'm going to put right sides together. And again, you always want to make sure when you're putting these down that you're well within covering the seam lines and well within the next section. But you've got right sides together, and we're ready to stitch between 1 and 3. And we'll keep going on with that. Right sides together. Put our piece down with our edges even, just like that. We're going to flip it over and stitch between 1 and 3. And you can see this process really does go pretty quickly, because you don't have to stop and think about it. You don't have to stop to press. You don't have to stop and trim. We're just going to stitch until we get through all of these blocks. Then we'll do the remaining parts. So we're just going to keep on going like this, and when I get these blocks stitched, I'll get back to you. Here's my pile of blocks with piece 3 added to it. It took less than 15 minutes for all 24 pieces, and now we're ready to start pressing. And again, because we're doing it the speed way, we're going to be pressing all of them at one time. And once again, I emphasize over and over, but if you want these blocks to match up for you, you need to make sure that you're pressing them well. So I'm going to go ahead now and press the rest of these blocks open, and I will be done, or when I'm done, we'll come back and we'll go from there. And once again, within 10 minutes, I have them all pressed, and now they're ready for trimming. So let's start with that. We're going to take our cover stock, and we're going to place that down between section 3 and 5. Pull back your foundation piece and trim. And you'll have that. Now you don't have to worry about these outside edges again. We'll trim that when we trim the final square of the block. So once again, we're going to take our cardstock, put it down between section 3 and 5, fold back our foundation, place the adder ruler, and trim. Now you'll notice on this one, unlike the first time we had a trim, we only have one line of trimming to do. So this will go a lot faster. So I'll see you as soon as the trimming's done. Once again, less than 10 minutes later, I have all my blocks trimmed, and I'm ready to move on to piece number 4. Working on segment 4, we take the ones that we've just stitched, pressed, and trimmed, and we have our segment 4 cut out here, and we're going to proceed. Now, when we place piece 4 on the foundation piece, we're going to put raw edges together, right sides together, and again we want to make sure that this wider part of your fabric aligns with the wider part on your foundation piece. That'll guarantee that you're covering the area the way it should be. And again, because we're working with a smaller block and we've still allotted the 1/2 inch all the way around, you should have more than enough fabric to cover that area. So once that's in place, we're going to go ahead and stitch. And another short 10 minutes later, we have piece 4 stitched onto your block. Now all we have left to do is to press it and trim it. So let's start out with the pressing. We want to, again, I can't emphasize this enough. We're not rubbing the iron over it, we're pressing, just holding down firmly. And I press from both sides, both the front and the back. Again, we're going to fold piece number 4 over. We're going to set the iron on it. And we're going to press. We're going to turn it over to the other side and press. And when we're done with this, I'll come right back to you. So they're all pressed, and we're ready to start trimming. So we're going to take our cardstock and lay it down between section 4 and 7. And again, you'll notice that we have more and more to trim away because we've allotted that 1/2 inch. But that's okay, it gives you plenty of fudge room. We don't have to worry about trimming this edge though, because we'll get that in our final trimming. So once again, we're going to take our cardstock, we're going to place it between section 4 and 7. Pull back your foundation piece, place your attic order, and trim. And we'll continue to do that until we get all these pieces trimmed. And I'll see you on the other side. We have our whole stack of pieced foundations 1 through 4. We have piece number 5 here. I'm going to place piece number 5 upside down so that when I pick it up and put it on my foundation piece, it will automatically be placed right sides together on the foundation, like so. I want to make sure that I'm extending into the seam allowance on this side and this side. And then I'm going to flip and I'm going to stitch. Pretty easy, huh? Now let's try that one more time. We're going to take section 5, place it right sides together, raw edges even, making sure that we extend into the seam allowance on both sides, like so. Flip it and stitch it. And I'll come back to you after I get the rest of these all stitched. Okay, another 10 minutes has gone by. It seems like everything is being done in 10 increments to make these 6 blocks. So we have pieces 1 through 5, and we're ready to press 5. And then after we press block number 5, we'll be ready to trim again. So we'll press that, turn it over and press again, and continue. So this is just nothing but assembly line sewing, pressing, and trimming. But it seems to go so much faster because we don't have to stop and do all these steps in between. We're concentrating on one function at a time, and we're going to continue on with that function while it's fresh in our mind, so therefore it makes us go a little bit faster, and then we'll go to the next function. So we have 3 main functions. The first one is the stitching, the second one is the pressing, and the third one is the trimming. So I'm going to continue pressing these, and I'll be back to you as soon as they're all pressed. And a magic 10 minutes later, we have all our blocks pressed, and we're ready to trim. This time we're going to be trimming between sections 5 and 6. So we're going to put our cardstock on that line, pull back our foundation piece, place the add a quarter down, and trim. I think you're starting to get the hang of this now. It really does go a lot faster when you're trying to do so many blocks at the same time when they're the same block, so you can keep repeating it over and over, and it just goes a lot quicker. So I'll be back again in a magic 10 minutes, and we'll go to our next step. Because we're working on a much smaller scale than block 2, I'm going to continue this block 3 so that I can go into a little more detail on how to accurately match up all the matching points. Hopefully this will make things a lot easier for you.